Master Manipulators, Planetary Conquerors, Soul Devourers, Nightmare Lords, Dragon Tyrants, Steel-making Demons, welcome to the dark corners of Dreamworks. Today we're ranking every single Dreamworks animation villain from evil to most evil. Starting as we usually do with the latter category, let's begin with the villains who canonically learned their lesson and changed for the better. These are the reformed villains. At the bottom of our list we have a classic example of the monster to pet pipeline, Chunky from the Croods. Chunky starts as the most dangerous of many creatures who attack the main ensemble cast. He's not averse to attacking people while they're down and doesn't always take pursuit of his prey seriously, that is, until he's forced to. Next we have one half of the villainous duo from Trolls band together, Veneer. From an objective standpoint, Veneer is just as guilty as his sister of their mutual crimes. He contributed to kidnapping, torture, and fraud on a pretty major scale. So why isn't he any higher? Well, to put it simply, he actually has a moral compass, which separates him pretty bluntly from his sister. It's plain to see that Veneer is manipulated by Velvet to do what he does. Probably the most blatant example of this was the scene where Floyd tried to appeal to his morals to convince Veneer to let him go.
Just because she's your sister doesn't mean you should let her treat you like garbage.
Doesn't it?
Only for Velvet to coincidentally decide to be nice and encouraging to her brother for the first time in the movie. Wow, what a nice and sincere turnaround for her character. Psych, she keeps verbally abusing him after this. Veneer is the one who exposes his and Velvet's misdeeds during a performance, which must have taken some serious guts. And he even accepts his prison sentence with a smile on his face, happy to get the chance to atone for his crimes.
Fair enough. Prison it is!
Hopefully Floyd will be nice enough to visit him in prison, though I won't blame him too much if he doesn't. Up next is the literal loan shark Don Lino. Shark Tale has one of the less sympathetic protagonists in DreamWorks' roster, so it's fitting that its villain is one of the least evil of the bunch.
Do you know who I am? I'm the Don. The boss.
To the Don's credit, he does genuinely love his family, generally treating them and other allies with kindness, emphasis on generally. Unfortunately, most of the credit he'd get for this is immediately taken away by his ruthless methods. He's willing to literally torture his debtors if they can't pay their dues, and it doesn't accept Lenny's choice to be a vegetarian, insisting that he has to eat smaller, more defenseless creatures.
Right here in front of me now, eat this.
We can't really take points off of a shark for being a carnivore, but come on, man, that poor shrimp just wanted to live. In the end, he actually does find some redemption when Oscar talks some sense into him, which ultimately leads to Lino making amends with his son and making peace with the reef, even coming back to support the whale wash. Now, it's one thing to eat small, defenseless creatures, but helping others eat such creatures is even worse. Enter Creek from the original Trolls movie. Originally a friend to the village and Poppy's crush, Creek was a victim of circumstance. When the Trolls were captured by the Bergens, Creek happened to be the unlucky soul chosen as Gristle's meal.
Oh, my first troll.
Somehow managing to bust out of his mouth, Creek comes up with the solution to sell out his friends in Troll Village in exchange for his life being spared. Honestly, I can at least somewhat sympathize with him doing this.
I'm doing this for you.
Being literally eaten alive would surely make someone desperate and unreasonable.
He's someone else, anyone else, everyone else, but not me.
But for him to try and frame his decision as a heroic sacrifice, since he's the one who would have to live with the guilt of it, it takes away from most of the sympathy we'd have for him. And that's not to mention the smug smile on his face when he led Chef to the Trolls' hideout. The only reason he isn't much higher on the list is the fact that he eventually returns in the Best Goes On series, where he apologizes for his actions and promises to do better if they're ever in that scenario again. How it only took 11 minutes for Poppy and the gang to forgive this guy is beyond me, but I mean, good for him if he has changed.
Why don't you try some positivity, eh? A little positivity might go with that best.
It's gonna take more than a couple apology videos for anyone to trust this guy again, though. Better bust out that ukulele, Creek. Another Trolls villain, Queen Barb, is up next. If you've ever come into contact with a musical elitist, someone who just straight up refuses to acknowledge any music they don't personally enjoy, then Queen Barb will probably strike a chord with you. Barb's plan was simple, but brutal. She wanted to unite all of Trollkind under the genre of rock and roll, destroying all other genres of music and their respective cultures with extreme prejudice.
I can make us all one nation of trolls under rock.
Yeah, what could go wrong with attempting to streamline every human troll being into a singular genre and culture? As severely screwed up as Barb's motives were, she did ultimately show remorse for her actions and even managed to become friends with Poppy after the fact. It's maybe one of the less satisfying redemptions, but it's a redemption nonetheless. Perhaps a more impressive one is that of Humpty Alexander Dumpty from the first Puss in Boots movie. A childhood friend of Puss's, Humpty cherished his bond with fellow fairy tale freak Puss in Boots more than anything else. So when Puss became a hero, and in Humpty's twisted point of view, abandoned him, let's just say it wasn't over easy for him. When Puss decided to give up his life of crime, old Huevo here decided to get him roped into a large-scale bank robbery under false pretenses, ruining his reputation and having him driven out of town.
This is the money of the people.
On top of all that, he had the audacity to be mad at Puss for leaving him behind to face the consequences of his own actions.
Save me.
Save yourself.
And on top of that, he later betrays Puss again. He's saved from a higher, more evil spot only through his final moments, in which he helps Puss save the town from the Great Terror, sacrificing his life so Puss would be able to pull the golden goose up.
Puss, you have to save the baby or the mama will destroy San Ricardo.
And wouldn't you know it, he had a heart of gold all this time. This is a man's corpse. Rounding out this category is perhaps the least direct redemption of a Dreamworks villain, Captain Smek. His deeds definitely aren't nearly as heinous as Barb's nor Humpty's, but he makes up for that with his ego and his sheer pettiness. Smek is a control freak who insists on constantly running away from his problems, and while protecting his people is understandable, it's also worth noting that Smek's theft of a rock from the Gorg is the exact reason their arch enemies are constantly chasing after them. On top of being a coward, Smek is a jerk.
I will not abandon it! Someone fetch me my stress blankie!
Using his position as leader and his precious rock to shut people up.
Shush.
In the end, it turns out that the rock was actually an egg containing larvae of the Gorg, meaning that Smek was unknowingly carrying unborn children with him and running away from their panicked parents. Yeah, at that point, becoming a DJ on the moon is about the best you can hope for. Moving on, we now reach the characters who didn't really have direct redemption arcs, but the sympathetic antagonists are those who aren't exactly bad guys, per se. At the very least, they have understandable reasons for their actions. By far, the most pitiable of the bunch has to be Ken from the B-movie. Ken is, I guess, the antagonist of the B-movie? I mean, he isn't really in the movie that much, but when he is, his crimes include, getting kinda angry. He also tries to kill Barry, which, dude, that's a B.
That's funny, I just can't seem to recall that.
Not only does Ken have a right to take out any bugs that invade his apartment, but he's literally allergic to bee stings, and his girlfriend just does nothing but get onto him for being so heartless as to kill this poor, innocent Jerry Seinfeld insect.
What are you talking about? Are there other bugs in your life?
Seriously, man, Ken was done so dirty on so many levels. Imagine getting dumped because of a bee, having said bee seduce your girlfriend, and finding out that they open a law firm together, all in the span of one movie.
Oh, that bee is living my life!
Let it go, Kenny.
Next is another average Joe villain, but not voiced by Joe this time. Melvin from the Captain Underpants movie. Melvin is a stereotypical brainiac who's always snitching on other students to get that sweet, sweet extra credit.
Did you tattletale on us?
Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I did.
We'd arguably place him higher for that if it weren't for Professor Poopy Pants' brain scan on him. It turns out that the haha guffaw chuckalalamus, aka the part of the brain that makes you experience laughter in this universe, is completely absent from Melvin's brain.
Exactly. You have no sense of humor like a chair or a supermodel.
This explains why, despite being the smartest kid in class, Melvin never understands what the kids around him are joking about. Melvin literally cannot find joy in normal kid stuff like pranks, cartoons, jokes, etc. He's just able to cling to any extra credits and external validation he can get. Honestly, I just feel bad for the poor guy. Nerd emoji embodiment aside, it must be tough to go through life without being able to laugh. Next is another guy with a tough life situation, Mr. Tweety. While he's by far the less problematic of Chicken Run's antagonists, Mr. Tweety isn't perfect by any means.
No chicken escapes from Tweedy's farm!
He treats the chickens on his farm roughly and contributes to the hostile environment his wife has created for them. Still, he's also very clearly abused by Mrs. Tweety, so you can't help but wonder if he really has a choice in the matter. Another guy who's rough with animals is the Verminator from Over the Hedge. While he takes an uncomfortable amount of pleasure in killing animals, even having a giant effigy of himself hammering a rabbit on top of his van, it's worth noting that he's, an exterminator.
The Verminator is on the job.
That would keep him from even being on this list, but given that he's more than willing to make the animals suffer before they die if they take him off, he's still definitely earned a placement as a villain. The Madagascar native Fasa are a similar note. Rather than being exterminators, obviously, the Fasa are simply, carnivores. I guess you could interpret their actions as enjoyment of attacking and eating small creatures, but you could also interpret it as just them enjoying being alive. Still, as messed up as the Verminator is, he's at least providing a service to his community, whereas the Fasa are definitely just in it for themselves. It's understandable, sure, but you really have to split hairs on a list like this. Speaking of hairs that have split, next up is Mr. Crump. the principal of Jerome Horwitz Elementary. Whether you read the books or watch the movie, you know that Krupp is the embodiment of how basically every elementary school kid sees their principal.
I'm gonna get you two one day. One day. Very, very soon.
He's strict, he's boring, and he takes an unnatural amount of pleasure in tormenting children. So aside from him unknowingly being the alter ego of Captain Underpants, there isn't too much overtly good to say about him. That said, the movie actually does paint Krupp in a surprisingly sympathetic light. When George and Harold realize just how lonely and empty Krupp's life is, they start understanding him a bit more, even helping set him up on a date with the cafeteria lady as a well-intentioned prank. Without even knowing they did this, Krupp responds to this good fortune by returning the comic books he confiscated from them, even admitting they were at least a little funny. Something tells me that if you crack this egg-shaped bad guy open, just like Humpty, you'd find a heart of gold. Don't actually do that though, that's a homicide. An antagonist with less sympathetic traits is Gladys Sharp from Over the Hedge. Yeah, she has the look and general vibe of an average Karen, sure, but if you ignore her unpleasant personality for just a minute, think about it. What does Gladys really do as an antagonist? I mean, yeah, asking an exterminator to ensure the pest's deaths are as cruel as possible is a step too far.
This is exactly why I called the exterminator, to kill them before they get hurt like this.
As is having him install an illegal weapon of mass destruction to ensure victory.
Adios, animal infestation.
But when you think about it, Gladys really was just trying to protect her property. She's still a jerk and possibly a small-scale psychopath though, so even if she didn't totally deserve that jail sentence, I'm honestly glad she got it. Rounding out this category is the one thing more inevitable than a Karen: death. Death is a pretty terrifying concept to think about, and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish has one of its most unsettling renditions yet. After losing the 8th of his 9 lives, Puss literally comes face to face with the Grim Reaper, who's been gunning for him for as long as he's been around.
You didn't even notice me, because Puss in Boots laughs in the face of death, right?
Now, on one hand, we're talking about the literal embodiment of the cessation of life here, so there's genuinely no amount of moral mental gymnastics that could frame him as anything but a villain. That said, he's also a villain who's simply doing his job of taking souls to the afterlife. Everyone dies eventually, and death doesn't control how or when. He's just, well, he is. Still, he does thrive off the fear people place in him, so we aren't gonna call him an ethical entrepreneur either. But moving past death, it's time to talk about the actual bad guys from Dreamworks' filmography, the ones with crimes that warrant the label of villain. And no, not those bad guys. Definitely ready for that sequel though. We do start this year off with another furry anthropomorphic bad guy though, Tai Lung from Kung Fu Panda. Now, in his defense, I think there's a sincere case to be made that Tai Lung should be in the previous category. He does genuinely have a tragic past, given how Shifu literally raised him to be the future dragon warrior, only to have that dream snatched from him by Oogway's wisdom, with Shifu silently going along with it. His world crumbling before him, Tai Lung responded by trying to attack Oogway, which got him a lengthy prison sentence. When he broke out, he plotted to attack the Valley of Peace ruthlessly, showing that he was more than willing to hurt innocent people who had nothing to do with this trauma. So, like, if we've got any anime fans in the crowd, he's basically Dabi from My Hero Academia. Thankfully, Tai Lung got something adjacent to a redemption when he made a minor appearance in Kung Fu Panda 4. He was one of the many masters whose Kung Fu skill was taken by the chameleon for herself. And after Po saves him, Tai Lung leads the group in bowing in thanks to Po.
See you on the other side, Dragon Warrior.
Acknowledging him as a worthy dragon warrior. This could honestly be the start of a pretty sweet redemption arc for Tai Lung, but until we see that come to fruition, we'll just call him the least evil of the full-on villains we discussed today. Hailing from over the hedge is the brutal black bear, Vincent. RJ has to steal to get food. He's a wild raccoon living near the suburbs, after all. But stealing from his fellow animals proves to be possibly fatal when he goes after Vincent. And when RJ not only tries to steal all his food, but ends up getting it completely destroyed, Vincent offers him an ultimatum.
But I can get it! All of it!
My red wagon?
Redder! How?
Either RJ give him every last bit of food he stole by the end of the week, or RJ is his food by the end of the week.
And don't even think about running away, because if you do, I will hunt you down and kill you.
No matter your view on capital punishment, you can't deny that being eaten alive as punishment for theft has got to constitute as cruel and unusual punishment, right? Still, bears gotta eat, so we can at least sympathize with him as far as that goes. Sticking in the forest for now, we have the newest Dreamworks villain, Mantra from The Wild Robot. While she does directly call herself a morally neutral character, I'm not entirely sure I buy that. Even if she's programmed to be as nefarious as she is, despite her friendly demeanor suggesting otherwise, we have our doubts about whether she really needs to go as far as she does. This girl initially started a massive forest fire in pursuit of a single robot, all for the sake of a company that, by all accounts, probably doesn't have a care in the world for her. I guess in her defense, she is just doing her job, but unlike Death, she's willing to consider plenty of stuff as collateral damage in pursuit of her task. She's not exactly evil, but I wouldn't trust this weird robot jellyfish thing as far as I can throw it. Pick number whatever this is, my lord. That's where Thelonious will be. Thelonious is Farquad's right-hand man, a high-ranking executioner and dungeon worker who's willing to perform whatever dirty work his lord desires.
Thelonious...
He doesn't seem to be entirely there, especially given how he apparently doesn't know the difference between 2 and 3, giving him the Darwin Sinner medal.
3! Pick up a 3, my lord!
Still, any points he'd gained for his incompetence are lost by the fact that for some unfathomable reason he still serves Farquad after the latter is dead. Fiona and Shrek invite you to their wedding after everything, and this is how you thank them. For shame, Thelonious, you're better than that. Caseworker Miss Grunion is up next. We've seen all kinds of prejudiced villains here at Wicked Binge, but a speciesist villain is a very unique thing. Miss Grunion is of the strong opinion that a dog cannot raise a human boy.
In my opinion, a dog can never be a suitable parent to a little boy.
Which, I mean, I guess I've heard worse takes than that, but that doesn't excuse the fact that she uses Sherman defending himself against a bully as a jumping off point to her quest to get him taken from Mr. Peabody.
I hope I've made myself clear.
It's clear that she doesn't care about the kids she helps, but really just seems to enjoy the power she holds against others. Not to mention, she's one of those people who considers defending herself against a bully to be just as bad as being a bully, which makes her deserving of a high spot on this list regardless. Madagascar 2's main antagonist, Makunga, is up next. If you put Scar from The Lion King and Gaston from Beauty and the Beast in a blender, you'd have something like this wannabe king of the jungle. Makunga wants to be the alpha lion solely so he can tell others what to do, and that's a sentiment he doesn't exactly try to hide.
I'm better looking, I have better hair, I'm deceivingly smart, and I want everyone else to do what I say.
What he does try to hide, however, is his utter incompetence. He resorts to manipulation and scheming to achieve his goals, by forcing Alex into fighting a much stronger lion and thereby forcing Zuba to give up his position as alpha lion for not banishing his boy.
Sadly, the alpha lion must cast out all failures.
Makunga achieved his goal and proved himself to be a pretty crummy leader. He failed to come up with any solution to the drought that didn't involve fighting or bossing people around and ended up being dethroned by an old lady, who technically must qualify as the alpha lion now, right? I think that's a good career choice for her. Following him is another Madagascar villain, Chantal Dubois. Really, she's similar in moral code to Verminator, just way more extreme.
Now you deal with me.
See, Dubois' occupation is more than just a job, it's a hobby too. She collects the heads of animals she takes out and mounts them on her wall, with the mighty lion being her most coveted target. When Alex and the gang end up stranded in Europe, it's as if the gods have given Dubois a perfect opportunity, and she uses everything at her disposal for the sake of hunting this lion down.
A lion?
Abusing her employees along the way. I guess it's good that she's taking out her psychological issues on animals instead of humans, but, well, it's not really good, just less bad. Though not quite as inhumane as some others, Prince Charming is one of the most unsavory characters in the Shrek franchise.
The bravest and most handsome in all the land.
Look, I'll give him this. He was literally raised by Fairy Godmother to defeat the dragon and save Princess Fiona, so the fact that an ogre indirectly stole his life's purpose must have been pretty rough.
I will smite him where he stands. He will rue the very day he stole my kingdom from me.
But that doesn't necessarily justify his attempts to rally other misfit fairy tale creatures against heroes like Shrek, essentially staging a coup against Far, Far Away.
Pretty unfair.
Attempted murder and conspiracy are pretty bad, but honestly, this may be a hot take, but I kind of feel bad for Charming. Trying to kill Shrek is not cool, like at all. But you have to remember, this guy's mother spoiled him rotten over his entire life, only for the great rewards he was promised to be snatched away, and just a few days later, so was his mother. Charming isn't a good guy by any means, but he's at least one of the last villains on the list we can feel kinda sorry for. She may be much less of a threat than the Dawn, but Lola definitely deserves a noteworthy spot on our list. Right off the bat, I think Lola deserves the Greed Sinner medal. The term gold digger was invented for people like Lola or Fish, like whatever.
Well, I guess that makes me Oscar
The millionaire. The millionaire. The millionaire. The millionaire.
She literally only showed interest in Oscar because he had potential to strike it rich, and when she doesn't get what she wants, she'll go after the one thing she wants more than money: revenge. Being involved with Don Lino basically makes her a class traitor on top of already being a gold digger. She's not a villain who ranks this high because of exceptionally dangerous motives, but rather for a lack of any sympathetic qualities. This fish belongs to the reefs. Closing out this section is the true villain of Megamind, Titan. They say that power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. For example, what happens when you give a stereotypical incel superpowers? You get Titan, the superpowered form of Hal Stewart.
With my power and your big-headedness, we could rule the city.
His obvious crush on Roxanne Ritchie was one of the biggest motivations to become a powerful hero for him, that is, until she rejects him. This leads to Titan not only abandoning Roxanne on top of a building, but also to him using his powers to cause meaningless destruction all across Metro City. This breaking point earns Hal the Lust Sinner Medal. He's basically the superhuman neckbeard equivalent of a kid throwing a tantrum because he didn't get the toy he wanted.
Let me guess. After seeing how awesome I am, you finally come to your senses. Well, I'm over you.
But anyone with motives like that can't be totally evil, so we'll give him some leeway and keep him out of our highest categories. We're starting to venture into the characters who embody villainy to their very core. They are the truly villainous characters. First up in this category is Victor Quatermain from Wallace and Gromit: Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Oddly enough, he bears similarities to the last two villains. Like Hal, he wants to get with a woman desperately, but like Lola, it's only for the money, baby.
What you see is what you get.
He completely ignores Lady Tottington's desire for the rabbits on her property to be dealt with humanely and constantly harasses her and the animals she desperately wants to protect. Even after finding out that the were-rabbit is Wallace, he's more than willing to shoot him with a rifle.
All right, so what if it is that blithering idiot? No one will ever believe you.
Which definitely makes him a worse gold digger than Lola, since at least she wasn't an attempted murderer. Now we're cooking. Next up is Chef Bergen from the original Trolls. Now, we're really trying to be as sympathetic as we can with these villains. For instance, if I were exiled from my entire community for an honest mistake that I had no control over, I'd be pretty desperate to get back on good terms with them too. But while I won't claim to be perfect at all, I like to imagine that I wouldn't try to manipulate my friends and neighbors into believing that the only way to achieve happiness is by eating small, defenseless creatures and forcing them to do so, even when I'm blatantly proven wrong.
That's right. A calm troll is a tasty troll.
Still, the fact that the chef-themed villain was defeated in the end by getting eaten is some beautiful irony, especially since she was about to double-cross Creek, but since Creek was also a double-crosser, I'm not even sure what you'd call that from a moral standpoint. Next is another chef, but this one is more motivated by money. Mrs. Tweedy from Chicken Run. They say that hurting or killing animals is one of the earliest signs of psychopathy in a child, so with that being the case, I think you can probably imagine that a woman running her chicken farm like a death camp has more than a few red flags. Her love for tormenting chickens is awful, especially since it's all for the sake of money, but that alone wouldn't get her quite this high up. What does, however, is her abuse of Mr. Tweedy. She's physically, verbally, and emotionally hurting him constantly and uses him as little more than a manservant for her evil schemes.
It's a pie machine, you idiot. Chickens go in, pies come out.
Honestly, at a certain point, you can't even consider him a full-on antagonist, and while her relationship with Dr. Fry wasn't as bad, that doesn't erase everything she put her ex-husband through.
It's all in your head, Mr. Tweedy. Say it.
Hopefully being at the center of another explosion taught her a valuable lesson. It probably didn't, though. Up next is the villain of Flushed Away, the Toad. Another one of the villains who comes so close to being sympathetic. The Toad's origin story is that of an abandoned pet. When he was flushed down the toilet and replaced by Prince Charles's shiny new pet rat, he gained a hatred of rats altogether. But despite his grudge, he still tried to be sympathetic towards fellow upper-class pet Roddy. That is, until Roddy single-handedly destroyed his prized art collection, intensifying his hatred of Roddy's kind.
Daddy will get rid of them all. He will. They'll all be ditty-witty.
But even if this hadn't happened, it wouldn't take away from the Toad's ruthlessness.
What do you think?
He's a madman! Run away! Run!
Pardon me.
He not only keeps his enemies frozen as trophies, but he ultimately plans to flood Ratropolis, effectively mass murdering the entire population to finally vent his rage against them. Though he's not the only one who let hatred of another species take over, but for Dave the Octopus, his hatred spread even wider and was executed in a more brutal fashion.
What? Are you kidding me?
See, Dave became envious of the penguins when they showed up at the Central Park Zoo. When their cuteness took away all the attention that used to belong to Dave, he gained a grudge against not just them, but all cute and cuddly animals in the world? Yeah, that earns him the Envy Sinner Medal, since his jealousy led him to invent the Medusa Serum to make them so ugly that society would totally turn on them. How would this help Dave regain the love of the public, you may ask? Well, I mean, you can ask, but I still don't know the answer. I don't know.
And then what? You think that's gonna make everybody love
love you? No, but they'll despise you.
All I do know is that anyone who hates penguins can't possibly be innocent.
Sorry. Wait, I live this way.
The calculating villain of Shrek 2, Fairy Godmother, is up next. She's not exactly falsely advertising her services, she's just making them sound way nicer than they actually are.
Now don't worry. I'm here to make it all better.
When she says happiness is just a teardrop away, what she really means is that she's been plotting her son's entire life for him, striking a deal with Fiona's parents to relieve her of her curse in exchange for her marrying Prince Charming.
Oh, believe me, Harold, it's what's best. Not only for your daughter, but for your kingdom.
It's a calculated way of attempting some form of world domination, but one that came remarkably close to success and took advantage of her son and an entire family, leaving their happiness basically hanging in the balance as blackmail. Still, she was kind enough to give us that cover of I Need a Hero, so well, kudos for that at least. Just shy of our top 20, yes, really, we have Zekel Khan from The Road to El Dorado.
Good morning, my lords.
Corrupt priests are bad enough on their own, but when they believe in making human sacrifices to their gods, they reach an entirely new level of dangerousness. To Zekel Khan, people are less like people and more like currency to buy the favor of the gods with. He's undoubtedly killed countless people in his career, if you can even call it a career.
It seems to be missing something. Ah, that's it.
And won't even hesitate to throw away his own acolyte for the sake of more power. Poe's least intimidating villain, the Chameleon, is next. If you're afraid of lizards or stairs, you might want to click off this video now because this talent-stealing reptile won't go easy on you. Even the dead aren't safe from her, given that her whole scheme is to steal the power of Kung Fu masters present and past, including Shen, Tai Lung, and Kai, just to name a few.
Huh? This reptilian runt wants more.
The closest thing we can point out as a good characteristic of the Chameleons is the fact that she took in an orphaned Shen as a young girl, and even then it was mostly because she saw potential in her to help fulfill her dreams of Kung Fu greatness. In actuality, the only reason she isn't ranked higher is the fact that the remaining baddies have more dangerous ambitions than just copycat Kung Fu. Like, for instance, let's move on from a character whose plan revolved around stealing the talent of famous celebrities to one whose plan revolved around stealing the talent of famous celebrities. It's Velvet from Trolls band together. Quite the long way from her brother, Velvet ranks this high for being the mastermind behind the fraudulent pop duo's plan. She kidnaps Floyd as a means of harvesting his talent to take for herself and her brother to become famous, and by doing so, she also plans to lure the rest of Brozone to them as a rescue mission, or from her standpoint, a replacement of batteries.
That's what I'm going for.
She's fully aware of the fact that she's torturing the trolls to do this, having none of the compassion or accountability of her brother. Ultimately, her desperation to perform on as large a scale as possible is her downfall, which earns her the Pride Sinner Medal and a devilishly devious spot on our list. One of the smartest villains on the entire list next is Professor Poopy Pants. Don't let his name fool you, Poopy Pants is no joke. In fact, if he had his way, nothing would be a joke, because his plan was to destroy all laughter in the world so nobody would laugh at his name again.
Higher capacity for laughter. For years, I've tried to shrink it or cut it out entirely.
If you don't think that warrants such a high spot on our list, let me rephrase that. The guy is literally planning to lobotomize the world, particularly children, to ensure they can never experience full joy.
Still give you the chuckles now? Poopy Pants?
I don't get it.
I get the embarrassment, dude, but you somehow outdid yourself by getting beaten up by an obese man in his tidy whities. All of those smarts, and you couldn't just think of getting a name change? Dr. Zara is one of our coldest villains, which makes sense considering her origin movie. While Burnish is pretty ruthless in his pursuit of Everest, he's a puppy in a field of butterflies next to Zara. Dr. Zara isn't trying to further science or protect endangered animals or anything. Zara is concerned with two things: fame and fortune. When Burnish is revealed to be, not a horrible person, Zara decides she's no longer interested in being employed by him and starts rushing to capture the mighty Yeti at any cost.
Quick! Mr. Burnish needs help!
She doesn't even think twice about pushing Yi, who was a 16-year-old kid, mind you, off a bridge, which could have led to a gruesome death if this weren't a kid's movie. That's not cool, Dr. Zara! Unlike you at the end of the movie. Too far? Nah, just right. Clearly, we're really starting to get into the ruthless antagonists now, and next up is Chelsea Van Der Zee. I'll admit that Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken is one of Dreamworks' less remarkable movies, but one area it did not slack in was in the ruthless villain category. As it turns out, Chelsea is actually Nerissa Undercover, the very same mermaid queen who was defeated by Ruby's mother 15 years prior.
I still can't believe your mom hid all of this from you.
This mermaid waited 15 years to psychologically manipulate her enemy's daughter into helping her get the power to wipe out krakens and take over the ocean.
Oh, there is no Chelsea.
While being born into a culture of war is pretty bad, dragging a kid into it via psychological manipulation is a low blow, and one that makes her worthy of the Wrath Center Medal. Like, seriously, girl, 15 years? At that point, just find another teenager to manipulate. Jeez, that's just bad business. And it's only going to get worse from here on out. We've now gone beyond the point of no return. These are the irredeemably evil villains. And who better to start off this category with than a classic biblical villain, King Ramses II from the Prince of Egypt. The Pharaoh of Egypt and adoptive brother of Moses, Ramses contributed greatly to the Egyptians' persecution of the Jews, using them as slaves to build their monuments, or whatever he felt like forcing them to do that day. He didn't lift a finger to stop other Egyptians from abusing them, even the elderly and handicapped. He's a seriously messed up guy, and I feel like I could finish this entry right here because slavery is bad is a pretty simple concept for most people.
Please, you must listen. I will not be the weak link.
The only thing keeping him from landing any higher is the fact that he did genuinely seem to care for his family, especially his now departed firstborn son. But even so, if he just freed the Jews like Moses and literally God himself told him to, he could have spared his people all that suffering.
Leave me.
While we can pity him a little bit, Ramses got what was coming to him. It's just sad that his people had to suffer for it. Continuing the age-old archetype of slave-owning Dreamworks villains, Professor Marmalade is your guinea pig. It's ironic that the wolf in sheep's clothing archetype was revealed by double-crossing a literal wolf who turned out to be a good guy. Marmalade, on the other hand, painted himself as a charitable and altruistic guy who believed everyone had some good within themselves.
Some have described your goodness as second only to Mother Teresa.
Oh, Tiffany, it's not a competition.
But through some seriously elaborate manipulation, he managed to trick the bad guys into stealing the meteorite for him, allowing him to use other guinea pigs as drones to do his dirty work. Seriously, Marmalade, a guinea pig, is using other brainwashed guinea pigs as remote-controlled servants. Everything he does keeps his own hands clean, and to make him even worse, rather than just keeping the money he donates to charity, he has it driven right to its destination, only to have it stolen at the very last moment.
You see, I never cared about what's good, only what's good for me. Like, say, $1 billion. Ooh, I just got a tingle.
He's a greedy, sadistic little scumbag, which is really the last thing you'd expect to say about a little hamster-looking guy. Man, he is good at being evil. One of the strangest villains in today's discussion, Francis E. Francis, is next. Okay, seriously, a lactose-intolerant baby?
It turns out I was lactose intolerant.
No. That just has to be a glitch, surely. I wouldn't blame Franklin for being mad at God or the stork or whatever made him in this twisted world of imagination, but the man decides to hold a grudge against babies? I mean, like, I get it. He's one of the babies assigned to management, so he's an adult in a baby's body. It makes sense that he'd consider it worth blaming the co-workers who got him booted out of the company, but he goes a few hundred baby steps further by plotting to make a puppy so adorable that it takes away all humanity's love for babies for itself.
And I'm finally going to get revenge with the forever puppy.
It's all done out of spite and with no sympathy for the literal babies who, he believes at least, will be neglected indefinitely as a result. Okay, next we have the first How to Train Your Dragon villain, Red Death. I'm not sure why he's called Red Death since he's like 85% gray, but whatever color this dragon is, I know that his heart is straight up absent. Red Death forces the other dragons to bring humans to him as food, basically acting as a king waiting for his servants to cater to his every whim.
Totally makes sense. It's like a giant beehive. They're the workers, and that's their queen. It controls them.
I mean, sure, he's an animal, but dragons in this universe have demonstrated pretty decent intellect before, like Toothless and his legendary artistic talent, so it's not unreasonable to assume that Red Death knows exactly what he's doing, but that is still an assumption, so he falls short of an even more evil spot. Speaking of short, let's move on down to Lord Farquad. Don't worry, man, we won't make your entry too short. Okay, I swear, that's the last height joke for now. Farquad may be short, but that doesn't make him a bad guy.
Do you think maybe he's compensating for something?
What does make him a bad guy is the fact that he's an elitist dictator who commissions his army to gather up fairy tale creatures in exchange for money, planning to keep them out of his perfect world.
Perfect.
He's also willing to torture them for information, as seen by his most diabolical moment of all, threatening to take Gingy's gumdrop button.
No, not the buttons! Not my gumdrop buttons!
All right then, who's hiding them?
But if you thought his hatred of fairy tale creatures meant he at least might care about his citizens, well, prepare to be disappointed. Farquad makes a show out of pitting soldiers against each other, battling for the privilege of going to rescue Fiona from the dragon. Some of them may die, but it's a sacrifice he's willing to make. Maybe next time he should spend less time working on that tower and more time working on himself. Oh wait, he's dead. He may be tiny, but General Mandible has a pretty big rap sheet. Mandible is a legitimate danger to his own people, believing that the strong ants should be the only ones to survive. That's already an anime movie villain level of diabolical, and it's it's made worse by just how far Mandible proves he's willing to go in order to enforce his eat or be eaten society. He was willing to kidnap Princess Bala, force her into marriage to create what he would consider a master race, and even drown the entire colony of worker ants, all for the sake of his dictator-level scheme.
A fresh start. Imagine it.
A strong colony, sir.
Farquad almost seems kind of tame at this point, doesn't he? It's all downhill from here. We've reached the point where characters no longer have any redeeming qualities, starting off with Rumpelstiltskin.
Okay, go.
Somehow, an even more dangerous version of the fairy godmother in terms of his plan, Rumple took advantage of Shrek's frustration with mundane family life to trick him into giving up the day he was born. This resulted in Fiona never being rescued, and through a bunch of other events, in Rumple and his contract-loving, wig-wearing self ruling far, far away.
You signed the kingdom of far, far away over to me.
He rules it with an iron fist, regularly threatening the witches who serve him with a nice, refreshing glass of water, and he even has the nerve to take credit for a plan he got from a witch he literally just murdered.
You know, actually not a bad idea.
Rumple is fairly ruthless, and I'm not gonna act like he has any good qualities that keep him from landing at an even higher spot. It's just that the remaining villains are even worse. With that, let's talk about Lord Shen from Kung Fu Panda 2. This perilous peacock, like a concerning amount of villains on today's list, is guilty of full-on genocide.
China will be mine.
After being told by a seer that his end would come from a warrior of black and white, he took the totally reasonable precaution of killing every panda he could find. When he discovered that Po, being a panda, believe it or not, was still alive, he devoted all his resources to taking him out so nobody could stop his tyrannical reign. Shen's actions might have started out as a desire to protect himself, which could count as self-defense, albeit an extremely twisted, sick form of it, but he took great pleasure in killing innocent pandas and any other creature who dared to get in his way.
In front of all the world, you and your precious Kung Fu will die.
Even being offered mercy from Po, the very warrior he was afraid of, that didn't change Shen's mind, showing that he was fully committed to full-on villainy. Next we have the third How to Train Your Dragon movie's villain, Grimmel the Grizzly. He's a dark reflection of Hiccup, having similarly found a Night Fury at a young age, but instead of befriending it, he killed it. This led to a plot to eradicate all dragons from the world, except for dragons he enslaved for the sole purpose of killing dragons, of course.
So I decided to kill every last one, bringing real peace to the people of this world.
Yeah, this guy's pretty screwed up. In his plan of dragon genocide, he was willing to threaten not just Hiccup, but the entirety of Berk's lives if they didn't surrender their dragons. Even though he died, he technically did get Berk to surrender their dragons, but they'll be living in peace away from mankind, which means that Grimmel somehow both succeeded and completely utterly failed at the same time. Congratulations on losing, Grimmel? Up next, and just outside of our top 5 most evil, we have Drago Bloodfist. On the next episode of Villain Who Laughs in the Face of Mercy, we have Drago, another dark foil to Hiccup, who instead of training dragons prefers to enslave them and use them to take all the power he can get his big grubby paws on. War criminals are surprisingly par for the course for this final category, but what sets Drago apart is just how blunt he is. This guy makes it no secret that he fully intends to rule the world as the true alpha, controlling dragons and humans alike through sheer force and intimidation. He even briefly gets control of Toothless, attempting to kill Hiccup, but instead killing Stoic, who heroically sacrificed himself. Drago is ruthless and unapologetically evil, but even then, he pales in comparison to our remaining villains. One of our contenders for the gold medal, Pitch Black from Rise of the Guardians, is next. Pitch might initially seem like a pure evil character, and to an extent, he is.
Why, there's only one thing missing. A touch of fear. That never gets old.
I mean, the man's goal to destroy all children's hopes, dreams, and belief in the Guardians, and on a larger scale, to plunge the world into eternal darkness. So, why isn't he getting the gold medal of evil? Well, simply put, there's the chance that Pitch Black is actually a kind of tragic villain. It's implied that he was ostracized from the Guardians, and that his power, once meant to keep people on the straight and narrow, was corrupted by nightmares. It excuses nothing he did throughout the movie, much less his attempt to bring Jack Frost to the dark side, but you can't help but wonder if Pitch Black would have at least been less evil if he'd only had some friends. Whoa! What took us so long to mention Jack Horner on our list? He's an irredeemable monster, and like Drago, he doesn't try to hide it. That said, it might be weird to place him even lower than Drago of all villains, considering he's a much more lighthearted villain.
Yeah, I couldn't get this rock off of it, but it's still pretty cool, right?
But comic relief aside, this guy's one of the most unapologetically depraved villains on the whole list.
Well, you know what they say. Can't bake a pie without losing a dozen men.
Anyone who'd casually shoot a puppy in the face without hesitation is undeniably one of the worst kinds of people on the planet. And that's not even to mention his goal to essentially form a monopoly on magic, becoming supreme ruler of the world. Hopefully this isn't insensitive, but Jack gets today's Gluttony Sinner Medal for his desire to hoard all the magic in the universe for himself, which I think is a pretty good reason. When even your conscience gives up on you, you've earned your spot as one of the most evil on the list. Taking our bronze medal of evil, we have the final Kung Fu Panda, Kai the Collector. Shen is widely considered the most evil Kung Fu Panda antagonist, which is totally valid, and honestly, we were leaning towards that conclusion. But here's the thing about Kai. As a former friend of Oogway, the pair discovered a village of pandas who taught them about Chi. Almost immediately, the revelation of this power corrupted Kai, and he took it upon himself to attack the village, stealing all the pandas' Chi for himself. He and Oogway had an earth-shaking battle as a result, and Kai was banished to the spirit world, at which point he decided to destroy Oogway's legacy as revenge, then finishing his whole Chi-stealing debacle.
And we'll finish it here!
Like Jack Horner, he wanted to take all the magical power in the universe for himself, which Poe gladly granted him. Unfortunately, godlike power isn't exactly manageable if, you know, you're not a god, and Kai's stay in the spirit world was therefore upgraded to a lifetime membership. Say hi to Tai Lung for me, Kai. Speaking of the afterlife, the Silver Medal of Evil goes to Eris, goddess of chaos from Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas. As her name implies, Eris is a goddess of chaos, and alongside her top-tier bro Proteus, she's basically the best part of the movie.
Glorious chaos.
She creates chaos for no reason but chaos itself, which is truly chaotic, taking a great pleasure in toying with the earth and its inhabitants, from framing Sinbad for her own thefts to blackmailing him into doing her bidding. At first glance, it might seem like she has a sense of integrity due to her keeping her word to Sinbad, but that's only because, by her own admission, she's bound for eternity. If that temper tantrum near the end of the movie was anything to go by, if Eris had her way, she would not be letting Sinbad sail any more of those seven seas. And to cement her top spot, she straight up says the only reason she leaves his side is that she has more people to screw around with. Honestly, that level of pettiness is almost respectable. Almost.
I've got places to go, things to destroy, stuff to steal.
And you guys can say hi to our gold medalist of evil, Galaxar, from Monsters vs. Aliens. Most of the villains we've talked about so far have had one important thing in common. They had a reason for doing what they did. Even Eris, she is literally the goddess of chaos, so what else is she gonna do? Now, on the other hand, I guess Galaxar does have a reason in a broad sense. He wants to destroy all life on planet Earth to replace it with clones of himself, but why exactly does he want to do that? Good question! The answer seems to be that Galaxar is an absolute psychopath who does whatever he wants when he wants.
Most of you will not survive the next 24 hours. Those of you that do survive will be enslaved and experimented on. You should in no way take any of this personally. It's just business.
An even better question is why he destroyed his own home planet before the events of the movie, for which the absolute best reason we can give is that his wife kept nagging him to have kids. You probably, hopefully, don't need us to tell you that that is not a proportional response, and that's exactly why he takes our gold medal of evil.
Who dares to wake me?
Galaxar is like if you put Roger from American Dad and Invader Zim in a blender, then removed any sympathetic qualities from them, which isn't a lot really. Your result would be a man with genius intellect, world-dominating ambition, a planet-sized ego, and a complete lack of any moral fibers. That level of evil is something most villains couldn't even dream of. So while he's undeniably a pure evil character, Galaxar should honestly be proud that he managed to be so insanely malicious.